Hello watch lovers, welcome back to the channel. Today we have this lovely Cartier Pasha on the bench. This is reference 2475. We see it has this lovely salmon dial and also the big date. This show a bit of wear, so we're going to clean that up as well. Let's have a look at the big date. We see the two numbers change individually. So we're going to, of course, see how that's actually done a bit later on. You see the watch also has a hack, so we can set the time more accurately. And of course, the Pasha also has this quite iconic crown protector. Let's check the time grapher. We see the lines are nice and straight. The amplitude is a bit low, but that's just a sign that the watch needs a service. So let's take the bracelet off and then we can open the watch up. It's definitely been a while since the watch was cleaned. A bit of gunk here and there, but not too bad. At least in the bracelet, that is. A bit worse in these screws on the case back. That is some DNA right there. That's all gonna be cleaned off, obviously. Let's then get the case back off and see what kind of movement we have. That looks a lot like the ETA 2892, which it is. There is a module on top of it for the big date. I'm gonna see that in a minute. Let's just first take out these various case clamps. And also the bezel is actually screwed on from the underside. So after unscrewing those three screws, the bezel also comes off. And then we can take the movement out and we're going to align the hands so we can easily take them off. Using a piece of plastic or actually silicone here to protect the dial when we take the hands off. And there we see these two discs for the big date. So the right disc is for the single digits and the left disc is then for the tens. So we see when it flips over from 19 to 20, the mechanism then ensures that the tens on the left side, they flip one over. And then there has to be some special solution for the transition of the months. So going from 30 to 31st to the 1st and so forth. We'll have a look at that later. Let's put all of these items into this secure case for the dial and the hands and so forth. And then we can get on with the disassembly. Before doing that though, if you're looking for a beautiful vintage watch, then go to vintagewatchservices.eu. We always have more than 100 watches in stock. And if you're a YouTube subscriber, you can use this code for 10% off. And with that shameless plug behind us, let's go on with the disassembly. We're first taking off the automatic module with the rotor. I'm going to disassemble that later. So as mentioned, the movement is the ETA 2892 with that additional module on top for the big date. So we're in a familiar territory here for a lot of people. So the watch belongs to Mark, or rather his wife. This is the Pasha C, so a little bit newer iteration of the Pasha. The original Pasha is said to have been made about 100 years ago for the Pasha of Marrakesh. It was a gold watch with a grill protecting the dial, so looking something like this picture here. It's not actually clear if that watch was ever made, but at least the inspiration was there. So the Pasha launched in 1985, so it's not that old. The original Pasha was 38 millimeters, but the Pasha C is a little bit smaller at 35. The design was intended to be masculine, to be a men's watch, but I do believe that it appeals more to women than to men. But feel free to correct me in the comment field. Of course, Cartier is known for jewelry as well, and bags and all those kinds of things. And they definitely have a stronger base and position with women than with men. They have, of course, made quite a few classic watches. The Santos, the Tank, but to me also the Santos feels a bit more feminine than masculine. They recently made the Santos also huge, probably to make it appear more masculine. Anyway, we have disassembled the automatic module as well. It's all under this bridge here. And also going to disassemble the winding works on the underside of the barrel bridge. Whenever you have a watch with a module in it, then the base movement is typically the 2892 because it's quite thin. So it does allow the overall watch, even with the module, to be of a reasonable thickness. So I actually didn't get good footage of taking the mainspring out. This barrel is very shallow, so you have to be careful doing that. But we have all the parts laid out. Not a complicated movement, and that's welcome for a change. So let's get the parts into the baskets, and then we can get the cleaning machine running. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank my YouTube and Patreon members. You guys really make a difference. Thanks so much. As a member, you get access to exclusive videos, both more technical versions of these public videos, but also then specially made videos for the members. There's also a Discord server where we have a great community, helping each other solve problems, but also share successes. So if you're curious, you can click on the join button below to see what the different tiers offer, or you can go to patreon.com at this URL. With the movement parts simmering on low heat, we're going to turn to the case and we're going to clean it in the ultrasonic. And beware that the noise of the ultrasonic isn't entirely pleasant. With the cleaning machine having done its job, we're going to start by treating the escapement parts with Epilum. Epilum is a substance that leaves a very thin film on the parts. And that film helps lubrication stay in place a bit better. If you haven't seen this type of bottle before, this is the world's most expensive bottle. It's like a time glass shape, but it costs like $100. So yeah. After submerging the parts for a couple of minutes in the Epilum, we're going to also clean the pivots of the escape wheel and the pallet fork. That's just to make sure that there's no residue left on them, which might cause some issues in the movement. And then we're going to put a tiny little drop of oil in the center of the capsules. This is where the balance staff pivots, which are the smallest pivots in a watch, rotate. So when polished steel rotates in an oil lubricated jewel, then you have very low friction. Yeah, these are small things. So we're going to put the shock settings back into the main plate and the balance, and then see if the balance oscillates freely. That is a very important test that we do that. It's going to save us some headaches later if we have issues that we didn't discover at this point. that looks just fine. So onwards and upwards. Next step is to put in the mainspring into the barrel again. The barrel arbors for the 2892 are kind of infamous for being very small. So the mainspring winders typically don't fit very well. But they do now sell specific mainspring winders for this caliber, so I got one of those. That's why it's so nice and shiny. And given that this is an automatic caliber, I'm gonna sort of paint the sides of the barrel with some braking grease. And then we can put the mainspring in. So I get some questions sometimes whether or not we should always put in a new mainspring. And the answer is actually quite interesting, because if the mainspring is of the new type, so the let's say S-shaped type, then we don't really have to replace it if it's not set. If it's of the old type, so not S-shaped or of, for instance, blued steel, then we definitely need to replace it. But of course, those are the ones that are difficult to find replacements for. So the new ones are easy to find, the old ones are difficult to find, but those are the ones we should replace. So yeah, one of life's little quandaries. We're putting the automatic module back together. Whenever I say that, I kind of want to say we're putting the band back together, but we're not. The whole automatic module is underneath the barrel bridge. Well, there is one wheel on top of the bridge, but it's all part of the bridge. And this not very elegant click spring, but it does work. So with that ready, we can start building the movement. We still think of the 2892 as a modern movement, but it is actually 50 years old. It is, of course, still being manufactured, so that's why we think of it as a modern movement, but the design is then quite old. But it is a very successful design in most ways. The 2892A2 is the third version of the movement. Started out a little bit different, and then this is the, let's say, latest version. There's always going to be some issues with wear and so forth, and there have been some complaints about the efficiency of the self-winding mechanism. And one thing that is crucial about this movement is that you support the central jewel for the second wheel. The one we see here. This very dainty bridge, or actually a cock in English horological terminology. Because if you do not support that jewel, then that dainty cock will just flex and unwind the whole train violently. So with the train in place, we can turn the main plate over. We're over on the dial side. First we're going to lubricate the sliding pinion there, and then this winding pinion. The keyless works on this watch is definitely more, what shall we say, modern, more cost-cutting focused than older watches. There are quite a few stamped parts and plates instead of turned or milled as in older watches. I, by the way, came back from a course at the British Horological Institute in the UK just a couple of months ago. And I sort of realized whenever I go to the UK, of course, I have to rent a car. And whenever I rent a car, I do have some specific requirements, right? So I rented this full-blood red Italian and had good reason to believe it had 500 horsepower. And even though I was driving a stick shift at the wrong side of the road, I was really working that stick like a champion. Hugging the turns and really cornering and going all out, you know, up and down, shifting and so forth. So it felt like a bit of a personal insult when I was driving through a couple of these small villages, and it had signs saying, "Thank you for driving slowly." I mean, it was pretty much me and Michael Schumacher going at it. But when I stopped to fill gas, it kind of dawned on me that the 500 in Fiat 500 probably doesn't mean 500 horsepower after all. I mean, granted, it struggled getting up to 80 on the highway, but you know what they say, the fastest cars in the world are rental cars. Alright, so we got the keyless works back in while I was telling idiot stories about my idiot life. But at least the keyless works. So this movement has indirectly driven motion works. So the cannon pinion is not press fit onto the central arbor. The cannon pinion is, however, press fit into the wheel, so we need to lubricate that a little bit. So that's why I put the wheel upside down first. And then we're just going to test that the friction is proper, and then we can put the cannon pinion on where it should be. Just for the record, that was my bench squeaking. So we're oiling all the different posts here with medium oil. And then we can turn the movement back over. We're going to put in the pallet fork and lubricate it. And then lubricate the rest of the movement and see how it runs. So together with the 2824 and the 7750 chronograph family, the 2892 is by far the most used base movement. And there are some people who like to say that big watch brands should have their own in-house movements. That's kind of what makes a watch brand a watch brand. And I do kind of agree. But on the other hand, these movements are so good, so proven that for a smaller brand starting up, definitely the way to go to just source some of these movements. And it is, of course, very common that brands take more or less off-the-shelf movement, make some tiny modifications, and then give it their own name and claim that it's in-house. Of course, some brands like Panerai don't even bother doing that, just claim it's in-house and get caught. But ETA does make very high-quality movements, so it would be kind of silly to start building your own when you can use something that's been proven for the last 5 decades. Anyway, let's lubricate the remaining jewel holes, and then we're going to demagnetize the watch and check it on the time grapher. So we see the lines are straight, that's the most important, but the amplitude is a bit low. Can be a few reasons for that, but one thing we're going to check is the distance between the index pins. So looking at that under the microscope, we see that there is indeed quite a lot of space there. Now this watch has the Etachron regulating mechanism, so we use these two tools. Well, we mostly use the one on the left here. That's the one to regulate the stud and the index. So the first thing we do is actually turn the index so that it's completely open, as we can see here. And under the microscope again, we can see that now the pins are completely open. Also note that I let down the power, so the mainspring is static at the moment. Then we can use that same tool to gently move the hairspring inside the pins until we have it in the center. Can be a little bit fiddly, but this Etachron system is much easier than, let's say, the old school way of actually bending the hairspring at the stud. Once we have the hairspring in the middle, we can then turn the pin, the index, until we get to a point where there's minimal movement, but still movement. And then we can adjust the regulator so that we get to the correct beat error if necessary, and then also the right timekeeping. And we're going to be happy with that, so then we can turn our attention to the case. First thing we're going to do is take off those couple of loose parts. Here's a press fit pin for the crown guard. This is actually a bit broken, that pin, so I will make a new one a bit later on. Given that we're going to polish the case, we're also going to take the crystal out. This is a sapphire crystal, so it's quite easy to take in and out without breaking it. just press it out. So with the crystal and its gasket out, we can then take the case over to the polishing wheel. So we're going to touch up the bezel, the case back, the bracelet. So we start with the bezel. The bezel actually has a slightly curved surface, so I'm using a relatively soft felt wheel for that, so we don't disturb that curve. And then we're putting on the final shine with the cambric wheels. The case has brushed sides, but the lugs are mirror polished, so we're going to shine those up a little bit. We're also going to give the same treatment to the screws for the bracelet, as well as for the crown guard. The case back has a lot of engravings, so we're going to be gentle with it. I'm first using the Bufflex wheel here to give a brushing where it's difficult to reach otherwise. And then I don't actually have footage of it, but I did use 320 grit sandpaper afterwards, just flat brushing it. But we cannot go too aggressively here, otherwise we're going to remove those engravings and we don't want to do that. For the bracelet, I first remove the worst marks, and then we're going to use the Bufflex wheel again afterwards to put on brushing finish again. The bracelet also has an engraving on the clasp, so you want to be very careful with that one. These engravings are typically less than 0.1 millimeter deep, so not a lot to go on here. Depends a bit from brand to brand, but we want to be very careful. For the case, we are going to try to brush the top of the case a little bit. There is some damage to it that we cannot do too much about, but we should at least make it look a little bit better. And then we're going to gently brush the sides again. And with that, we're ready to put everything back together. I'm going to start with the automatic module. What I did off camera was to lubricate the reverser wheel in Lubetta V105. This reverse wheel also has a little bit of a bad reputation for being a little bit too weak. But reverse wheels are often weak. Then we can put the reduction wheel on top. And we're also going to put the rotor on. So if you happen to work in a service center, then the 2892, together with those other two movements, the 2824 and the 7750, are the ones you're going to work on 99% of the time. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because it of course makes you very efficient. I think once you've done a couple of hundred of this type of movement, then you probably can do one in an hour and a half or something like that. But working mostly on vintage watches, I really do enjoy the variance, or the variation rather. That more or less every watch is different. So that said, there are a few things that I'm getting used to with this type of movement as well. As we just saw, the hack goes under the automatic bridge. That's one thing you have to remember when putting it back together. And also that the blued screws are for the automatic module. One perhaps interesting thing about the screw slots are very wide, and that is so that they can be assembled by robots. But it does mean that you really have to adjust your screwdrivers for the mechanism. For the ball bearings, we're using Lubetta V106, and then we can put on the date mechanism. Let's have a look at the date ring. It's pretty clever. The yellow part of it flips over the single digit in the date. There's an open space there where it doesn't flip over between 31st and 1st. And then there are 4 pins that flip over the 10s in the dates. So an elegant solution, I would say. Of course, this whole date ring is then driven by the normal date mechanism in the 2892. So we're going to put that on. As always, we lubricate the posts with some medium thickness oil. That's the quick flip over date wheel that we put in there, and here we have the date jumper. It's a very similar construction to the 2824. Works well, can be a bit fiddly, but gives good results. This movement from Cartier is of course very nicely decorated. It is common that they don't decorate them under the dial, but apart from that everything is nicely perlaged. Nice polish, nice screws and so forth. Here we see the quick set date in action. What we're going to do now is we're going to lubricate the jumper a little bit so that we get as snappy a flip over as possible. And then we'll let that oil distribute over the various teeth. Then we have the big date module that we put over the movement. Again, that's very common to find the 2892 under a module like this. It's elegant design again, also nicely finished. The module is just held down by 3 screws and a couple of steady pins. It doesn't add a whole lot to the thickness of the watch, but yeah. The Pasha is of course not an ultra slim watch in any case. We're going to lubricate the date jumpers also before putting the wheels on. When putting the wheels on, you can look at that date ring and see where the wheels should be. But you might still have to do some trial and error. At least I did. The most important thing with these types of mechanisms is that you do make 100% sure that they work properly before you put on the dial and the hands and so forth. So let's check that we have the correct positioning of those 2 date discs. 20th, 30th, 31st, and 1st. Yeah, that looks good. What the? You don't have to test it again, do you? Someone here is a little paranoid, methinks. Now we're 100% sure. Alright, let's get the dial on. This dial is held in place by a couple of dog screws. So basically sharp-edged screws that cut into the dial fit a little bit. On any watch with a date, we want to find the moment that the date flips over, because we know that's midnight. And then we put the hour hand on at that point. Then we make sure that the hand doesn't touch the dial. And of course also that the date flips over at midnight. And that looks just fine. Let's see also with the minute hand on. We should make the date flip over between 1:45 and a quarter after midnight. But honestly, we should get it to about 5 minutes to and 5 minutes after. So let's see how we do it. Oh, that's not bad. Sometimes we're lucky. Last thing then to put on the seconds hand. And with the seconds hand on, we can then put the movement to the side and assemble the case. First thing we're going to do is put the crystal back in the case. We're simply going to press it back home, a little bit like the way we pressed it out. It's kind of satisfying to see that crystal being pressed in. There we are. And after cleaning the crystal, especially on the inside, we can then case the movement again. There's a movement ring as well that we need to put in after we put the stem in. So we're getting towards the end of this video. While I case the movement, put in all the different clamps and screw on the bezel, I wanted to ask you guys as well, if you enjoy this type of video as much as more complicated chronographs, repairs, that type of thing. Let me know in the comments below. I'm going to put a new gasket in the case back. We'll lubricate the gasket with some silicone before putting it into the case back. Man, my bench has really been squeaking a lot. I think I need to look what's wrong with it. As mentioned, I did brush the case back a little bit. So I think we can see that, but when we have so much engravings, we want to be very gentle. Those scratches look a bit worse to the camera than to the naked eye, but still, if we wanted to take them off, that would be yeah, a bit challenging. With the movement cased, we then need to put on the crown guard again. I made a new pin for it. The way this works is that the pin is a little bit tapered, so one end is slightly thicker than the other. And of course the same thing is then the case with those holes that the pin fits into. So when we then press it in, then it's going to stay tightly there. Then time for the last check. OCD is not a bad thing in watchmaking, in light doses at least. But of course you do need to check that everything is alright before you give a watch back. And that looks just fine. As mentioned, the watch belongs to Mark's wife, so the bracelet is actually much too small for me, meaning I cannot show it on my wrist, but we can at least enjoy a few different angles of it. And with those last few shots, I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you did, then please click like and subscribe. That will really help the channel, and it will get you more content. I'll be back with another video shortly. Until then, ta-ta.